Hey, you're there live. Hi. Thank you for your patience. We had some technical difficulties. If you weren't able to hang on, that's okay, because we will be recording. It'll be coming back later. All right. So today I'm very happy to introduce to you my friend, my pastor, a teacher. I've read all his books. If you've ever heard me express anything that you thought was loving, was kind, was wise in the spiritual realm, likely what I'm doing is taking something that Dave taught me and sharing it with you. Yeah. Not to put this guy too much pressure on this guy, but he's been doing this. He's been a pastor for about 30 years. He's been a counselor, therapist for over 20 years, and they come together in a way that works really, really well for me, because in my recovery, spirituality was key. Well, is still key. If I'm trying to do this too much for my head and not for my heart, I don't know how this would work. So what Dave talks about very much is unlearning, making space for the heart to rise up, so there's a bit of an integration. So what we're going to get into a little bit today is talking about that. There's some other words that we can apply to that, but it's not all in the clouds. This is very, very practical. This is what helps myself and a lot of other people. Technically, it could be hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people practice these techniques that Dave's going to share today. But before we get into that, Dave, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, you said a lot already. Yes, I am a pastor. You made me a little older than I am. I've been a pastor for 18 years and working in recovery for about that long as well. But I have been in ministry for about 30. So yeah, that's all true. I suppose the best thing I can say is that my entry into ministerial work was an offshoot of what one pastor called divine dissatisfaction. It was not being satisfied with the spirituality that I had, with the life that I had, with a sense of meaning and purpose, and certainly a dissatisfaction with the church as I experienced it growing up. And so it was that drove me to try to find something that made sense, something that had some teeth and traction, and was able to help me to get through the parts of life that were really starting to drag me down. And so that journey led me all over the place, but eventually it led me back to Christianity in a different setting. I grew up Catholic, ended up in an evangelical setting, and even there I couldn't find the peace that I was looking for. So that set me on a course of trying to find who this Jesus was in the most open and non-religious sense. And it was there that I discovered the Hebrew Jesus and the Hebrew and Aramaic roots of our scriptures that led me into what I would consider an authentic spiritual journey. Along with that, I discovered contemplative spirituality. And the two was a 1-2 punch, a real combination that led me into a completely different way of processing and living life. That, coupled with discovering the recovery community, and even though I don't have an alcohol or addiction background personally, I found that the recovery community was more church than church. And that's where it really came together. Working with people who are right on the edge, right on the precipice, working with people who needed a concrete way, concrete steps to be able to get through to the next indicated place they needed to be. It all came together because that's what this spirituality is. It is not in the ether. It's not someplace that is divorced from the acts of daily living. It is completely integrated. And that made perfect common sense to me. And that's what I've been following ever since. And our faith community, The Effect, is based on that. It's still really based in recovery, but recovery in the broadest sense, that everybody's recovering from something. And how do we get from here to the place we really need to be? How do we find that freedom that is the basis of everything that gets us out of the fear, out of the dysfunctional behavior and thought patterns? And so it's been kind of a non-orthodox way and approach, and The Effect is a non-orthodox look at how we follow Jesus and follow, I suppose, the Christian faith in the largest sense of that word.
Yes. So, to recap, Dave has been on his own journey. And what he's sharing with us today is merely what he's convinced of. And one of my favorite things about what Dave's approach is like, hey, look, you got to go become convinced of what you are convinced of. And when he says unorthodox, he is a teacher, not a preacher. He's a pastor, he's a counselor, but I don't think he's ever once given the same approach of any other pastor I've ever experienced. So that he comes from a place that's very loving, very kind, and very free. In our faith community and such, you don't have to agree with a single thing that's said. And that is very much like the recovery. You just have to have a desire to, I don't know, seek. So, and what are you seeking? What are you finding? Well, again, if you want to take some time and talk with Dave, he's always made himself available for me because there's been a lot of seeking, a lot of questions. And again, with that being said, yeah. So Dave, what I'd like to talk a little bit about is something that you touched on earlier, again, the Contemplative Way. For those that may have never heard the Contemplative Way is where I was when I first met you. Could you share a little bit with the group with what your understanding of contemplative is?
Sure. And in fact, let me just jump off from what you just said. There's a method behind the madness at the effect of not telling people what to think. We don't tell people what to think. We don't tell people what to believe. What we do is tell them what we're convinced of, what has worked for us, and how we see spirituality and the spiritual life in the most non-religious way that we can, still given within the Christian spectrum. But the truth of the matter is that the things of spirit cannot be given. They can't be transferred and they can't be bestowed. The spiritual life is like learning a second language or learning a musical instrument or learning to ride a bike. It is experiential. It is about muscle memory. It is about immersion. And there is no way that you can get it out of a book, and there's no way that a pastor or anybody can simply convince you of it and get you to sign on the dotted line, and that would have any kind of efficacy, I suppose is the word, any kind of effect in your life that we would consider something that would be approaching that freedom from fear, that would be approaching the sense of our own identity or meaning and purpose in life, which is really what we're after if we want to feel fulfilled as a human being. And so all we can really do is show the door and help model what it is that we're doing. If it's attractive to the person, they'll stick with us. If they start walking down the path themselves, we're there to encourage, we're there to work through the bumps in the road and everything that happens as you start to experience this, but it has to be experienced. There is no other way through this. There is a journey that has a predictable shape, and it's not just Christianity, but every faith tradition on the face of the earth and every responsible philosophy basically says the same thing. The shape of the journey is a descent before there's an ascent on the other side. The descent is letting go of everything that you think you know, everything that you have believed to date, that you have relied on, that has been a part of your survival, I suppose, part of your emotional stability, but the willingness to let it go so that you actually can find what is totally and completely true is that part of the indispensable part of the process. Until you're ready to walk away from something, you really won't see what it is. Now, the beautiful thing is that once we let everything go, as we continue on, a lot of those things come back. If they're true, they will come back. If they're not, then they don't need to. But that's the process. Contemplative spirituality is just that. It is the practice. It's the intentional practice of the descent. It's the intentional practice of stepping away from all the things that we think we know, literally stepping away from the constant stream of thoughts that are in our minds. And that practice and that continual immersion in the interior stillness, the interior silence, and interior solitude, even in the midst of your crazy life, if you can do that, it is a state of being that allows you to start to understand the real working of things, both interiorly and in terms of your connection with everything around you. Contemplative spirituality is experiential in nature. It's not theological. It's not religious in terms of practice and rituals. It is a way of living life that allows you to see and process things differently. So it has been absolutely integral. And if you really look at Jesus from a first century Aramaic Hebrew point of view, you find out, yes, he was a contemplative as well. And contemplative spirituality is something that has not been practiced in the Western church, especially for the last 500 years or so. But it is coming back, and we want to be one of those voices that helps to reestablish it as the basis of our ongoing spirituality. And the beautiful thing is that you can practice it. Everybody can practice, whether you're in the recovery community or whether you're in any community. It's something that can be practiced, and you can choose your religiosity as you move through the experience of understanding this root connection at the heart of everything.
Yeah. So I'm curious, could you practice the contemplative way without any type of religious attachment?
Oh, of course. And meditation and centering prayer is in the Christian tradition. These practices, of course, have been around. The kind of mantra right now, and the word is about mindfulness. We hear about that all the rage, in kind of popular culture, and it can get to the point where it's kind of meaningless at times, and it can mean so many things that it doesn't mean anything. But mindfulness, of course, is at the root of this. What we do in meditation or centering prayer, I call that offline, where we carve out times where we actually practice the technique of becoming still inside interiorly, stepping away from the usual processes of our mind and our consciousness. But the only reason we do that is not just so we can gaze at our navels in those times and think that we're accomplishing something. The point is that we can bring that silence, that interior silence, kind of like an astronaut brings his or her atmosphere around in their pressure suit, into the chaos and the craziness and all of the distraction of our daily lives and daily moments. That we have that we're bringing through. What's the purpose of that? The purpose of that is to be able to recognize emotional triggers when they are coming. The purpose of that is to be able to make choices that include the greatest good for everyone around us at any given moment. In other words, to literally be able to practice love that we can't when we are not free to be aware of what is going on in the moment and what love requires in the moment. We've all experienced ourselves and in other people when they are not capable of being able to literally see what is happening in the moment or make decisions because they're too tied up in the emotional response, triggers from the past that are triggered in the present, and their choices are destructive, but literally they don't know what they're doing. Our purpose in contemplation is to become aware and to practice awareness in a way that we can bring it into, if you'll excuse the metaphor, the battlefield of daily life. So in that craziness, we can still have that space between stimulus and response that allows us to continue to grow and to make choices that are good for everyone.
Yeah, it is. And I guess, for myself, I've tried to be pragmatic about it, of understanding, is my choices now benefiting myself and those I'm in relationship with? And, I'm human. I still err, but I err a lot less. And my approach to relationship is a lot less self-centered. There is an element of my awareness of others in trying to do it. But the fascinating thing for me, without being intentional, it just seemed to, even though I want to meet people where they're at, and I want to be loving, and I want to be kind, and I want to be of service, I no longer carry the same attachment to their response. Now, would that be in alignment with, is that just a fluke that's happening with me practicing this, or is this common in the journey?
No, you're right on it. That you got your thumb right on it there. This whole idea of attachment, that's what we're talking about. The mind is good at attaching to things. The mind needs to attach to things. It's part of our survival technique to be able to do that. If you think about what the mind actually does, it simply makes distinctions. It makes judgments. It categorizes things. It puts them into boxes based on whether it's a friend or a foe, a threat or an opportunity. And it stores all that information and holds it sort of as shortcuts. It's like saving links on your computer so you can get to it quickly. So if we know that these typical classes of things either are helpful or hurtful, then we know that so that we can instantly react. If we didn't have that, then our survival would be compromised. But when we hang on to those things beyond their usefulness, if we learn a certain set of categories and judgments in a certain phase of our life, especially in childhood, this is where it really comes down to. We learn the threats and the responses and the things that help us to survive through childhood. When we get into adulthood and those circumstances and conditions are no longer there, the programming doesn't go away. And so we're still processing on that old scheme. And so that is a lack of awareness or ability for us to adjust to what is really happening on the ground and what is happening in real time. And so what the practice of awareness does is allow us to lay all that stuff aside. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens through time. That stuff is layered up and it's deep. But as we continue to practice this stepping aside, we are seeing what is real and what is not. And then we can lay those things aside, and then we can approach a new moment with what is really there and make decisions based on what is really there, and not just bringing all that judgment. When Jesus says, don't judge, because the standard that you use to judge is going to be judging you. And we think that's God getting us because we did something bad, or we think of judgment simply being as condemning another person. That's really not what he's getting at. He's getting at this that we're talking about. If we already bring this previously established set of standards to every situation that we encounter, it's like this one size fits all that does no longer apply. And we judge moments as good and bad and people as good and bad based on that standards. We're missing the full opportunity that every moment and every person offers us in life. And we are shelving ourselves off from being able to see that this moment is perfect if we'll just let it be. And so it's a whole different way of approaching life. In recovery, when you think about it, it's kind of along the first three steps. That admission of powerlessness, that admission of vulnerability, that admission that everything that I thought I knew about myself and what I could do and couldn't do has to be let go before I can proceed any further on this journey. And the genius of the 12 steps at whole is it mirrors the shape that we were just talking about, that descent before the ascent. We have to let go of everything we thought we knew, admit our powerlessness, and then come to believe in a power that is greater than ourselves, that if we choose to hitch our wagon to that power, it can pull us through everything else that happens. And so it's that journey over and over again. And it's there in the 12 steps. It's there in the New Testament message. It's there in a lot of other faith traditions. And it's there in contemplative spirituality. And everything comes together. And it's a look at the same thing from all these different perspectives. And that's where it really gets enlightening, in the sense that you realize we're all saying the same thing if we're looking at the true thing. And then we can actually realize that there's not as much risk as we thought in letting go of the things that we have cherished and hung on to for so long, even though we may know increasingly that they are damaging us and others and they're dysfunctional, but we hang on to them because at least the devil we know is better than the one we don't, right? Now we realize, okay, now I can let go, and it's still going to be all right. In fact, it's going to be better.
Yeah, gosh. Oh man, I am tempted to go a little bit deeper into that. Not long ago, Dave was talking about liminal space with the group, and I'm feeling kind of frisky.
Oh no!
with the group, because no, that was very, very much an epiphany for me how Dave was describing it. Dave, I know I've kind of put you on the spot here, but also I know that you've talked about it recently. So, would you care to could you do a 10-minute summary a little bit about what liminal space is and how it is part of the journey?
Well, sure. And we can jump off what we were just talking about too. When our minds make that distinction and we categorize something as good or something as bad, something as useful and helpful, something is not, right, wrong, any of those binary choices that we typically make because what we prize in terms of our fear is certainty. You know, when you're afraid, what you really want is something that is certain. And so we try to create certainty wherever we can. And that's that binary, what has been called dualistic thinking. You know, something is good or something is evil, and there's really no middle ground, and we can see them as diametrically opposed and in some kind of cosmic battle with each other. And we do that to people, and we do it to political parties, and we do it to philosophies, we do it to all sorts of things. And again, it is a shortcut, and it's a way for us to survive and to get through life. But it is completely limiting. And the temptation, once you have landed in a certain place and you build the walls of your fortress around it securely so that you can feel certain and feel more secure in life, then everything that you do and everything you believe within the walls of your fortress has to be good, and everything out there has to be bad and wrong. And we can't see the problems within our own camp, and we can't see the truths and the good outside our camp. That is the dualistic thinking. But what happens is you walk through the gate or the doorway of your fortress into the great unknown out there. At that threshold, at that doorway, is what's called liminal space. It is the in-betweenness. It is the threshold, which is literally, the word means threshold from the Latin. When you're standing in the doorway between one world and another, and you're betwixt and between, and you're neither here nor there, you're not really in the new world, but you're not out of the last one. That is that threshold. From that vantage point, you can see both, and you may not see them fully, but suddenly you are in that place of disturbance and that place of disorientation enough that it breaks down the certainty that you had imagined for yourself and allows you the possibility of accepting something new. This is why I fell in love with the recovery community, because an addict or an alcoholic who is trying to move into recovery, who has come to the end of their unmanageable life, literally is in liminal space. They don't see it as such. All they see it as pain. They see it as their world has collapsed. Someone is promising them a new world, but is this going to work? How does this work? Is life ever going to be as fun as it was? How am I supposed to live? All those questions, that's liminal space. But the reason I fell in love with the recovery community is those are the very people who are capable of change. This is the launching pad. It's at that precipice that we can actually change and move in new directions and make quantum leaps, even intuitive leaps into new spaces. And everything is possible from that point of view. So what contemplation and contemplative spirituality is about is taking us to that liminal space, taking us out of everything that we were certain of, and lowering the sense of dread or risk or fear of what is coming next. And if we can stay in that space long enough, it's going to teach us all sorts of things. It's seen both sides of an equation. Even if you end up believing a certain philosophy, belief system, even a religious system, a political system, it doesn't really matter. If you remain able to criticize your own camp and to see the flaws that need to be fixed in your own camp, while being able to see the truth and the goodness in the other side, and be able to draw from both of those to consistently make choices that are the best for everyone in all camps, that is remaining in that liminal space. And it doesn't mean that we don't have passionately held beliefs. This is not about being all things to all people. We can have that passionate belief, but we stay enough in that doorway, on that threshold, to be able to see both sides. Now, arguably, Jesus lived his entire life, or at least his entire public ministry, in that liminal space. He could still see a Roman or a Samaritan or those who stood outside the Jewish camp and see them as being instructive and good and having more faith even than his own people. And yet he was able to deeply criticize his own people and his own system and his own religion for the excesses and the corruption that he saw there. That is balance. That's what we're after. And if we can achieve that, imagine what that would do for our political dialogue, to say nothing of our religious dialogue. If we had people who could do that and be part of that, that discussion in that balanced way, that's liminal space.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Dave. You took something that, oh my gosh, it's been difficult for me to try to talk about with others. and put it in a way that I understood better than when I've heard you talk about it before. I hope others in the group have got it. But yeah, just to recap, it's the difference between the familiar and the unfamiliar. Okay, and as Dave joked around about, it's the devil we know is better than the devil we don't know. And for myself, throughout my life, there's this big fancy psychological or psychiatrist word and stuff, confirmational bias. And again, I have my belief systems, and they're my beliefs. And again, they've been affected by my previous life experiences. We talked a little bit about friend or foe, fight or flight kind of stuff, limbic brain stuff. And again, it's still processed through every human brain. We have that going on. But yeah, there's things that are deeply embedded that can cause things like racism and sexism, and again, the dualistic thinking of good and bad, because of a previous experience. I have what I would refer to for myself a story about a certain person, place, or thing that consciously or unconsciously can get overlaid to the now. Okay. And that bias is affecting me from having what, again, I'm hearing him. Yes. As we mentioned here, it's a cognitive dissonance. Yes. That, again, frankly, a disease of perception. Certainly, there's a group of people here and you're all listening to this and you're all hearing what you're hearing. You're absorbing what you're absorbing and such. But to take away where it's not so personal, again, what I'm describing again is what one of the viewers is a cognitive dissonance. I can only know what I know. There's only so far we can go. And again, Dave, you being a professional, again, it's a small percentage, of growth. This is like, again, sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly type of thing. And a lot of times when it gets uncomfortable for me, I'll go back into the familiar because this new thinking, this new learning, this sitting with someone who I may think initially as a foe, as a threat, is now an opportunity for me to learn something new. Mm-hmm. And oh my gosh, I mean, frankly, it's one of the things why when I was inviting people to this group, I never was strategic on inviting somebody who had a certain worldview, or a certain demographic of part of my outreach of friends in Facebook land and stuff. Everybody's invited here because I embrace the diversity. This is how I have grown more so than any other way, is making myself uncomfortable and doing my best to let go and unlearn what I had coming into this conversation, this moment, this time. And again, it's really been interesting that little drops in the bucket now, I'm much more comfortable with the unfamiliar. And we're all in this world right now, and a whole lot of unfamiliar. This situation with the virus has affected all of us. I hope none of you have been affected with this, physically with the disease, but certainly, all of us are physically in a different space right now, and more so psychologically in a different space right now. And again, for myself, it has to do that I think I would have been a lot easier with anything if there was a hard deadline. There's no hard deadline with this and stuff. So there's no certainty in that regard. How long will we be in this boat? And, all the things that reverberate from that. Okay, so we're in this different boat now and such. We're in, trying to continue on with the metaphors. We're in uncharted waters. And what I'm seeing is that a lot of this stuff that I have repressed and wasn't cognitive of, but was still with me. And again, as I'm talking about these stories, these biases, it's coming up. And it makes me uncomfortable. And I will resort back to my old patterns, my old ways of thinking, my defensiveness and such, to assert myself that this is right and this is the way it should be. Doggone it. And if we're going to pull this back into how Dave was talking about the recovery world and stuff, doggone it, drugs and alcohol, they make me feel good, And this new space of not having this one coping mechanism that I've had that gave some form of comfort to my constant discomfort and such. Without that, it's a whole new world. And this practice that Dave's been talking about has allowed me to navigate the uncharted water and not freak out so much. My emotions are not as high as they have been in the past. And I don't think as much. See, frankly, for myself, reason why I did drugs and alcohol, I think a lot, I feel a lot. And the drugs and alcohol dampen that intensity of it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that thinking and feeling is a bad thing it blocks me from connection with the moment. And of course, those that are also in the moment. Now, what I'm trying to get is reframe up what Dave's talked about. Have I done a fairly good summary of what you're presenting with us, Dave?
Absolutely, and you're giving a practical life to it, and that's one of the things that's difficult about these concepts, either whether it's duality, non-duality, or liminal space, is that they can get really abstract, really egg-headed, and really unhelpful in terms of the way we live our lives, unless we bring it down and really see what's in action. I mean, what you're describing, even the dive into this group and the experience of managing and facilitating this group, recovery out of addiction as you experienced it, the COVID-19, this whole last 2 months has been a collective dive into liminal space for all of us. And the fact that you said there is no end date. We would love an end date because that would be certain. And then we know exactly how long we have to go through this, and then there'll be an end date and everything goes back to normal or wherever it goes to. But there is no end date. And we can try to create one, but that's just an illusion. The certainty is illusion. Life is not certain. Faith is not certain. The most damage we've done to faith is to try to make it certain, as if we can prove God empirically, logically somehow. We can't. That's the whole point. We can't. To live life fully is to live life as mystery, to live life as part of the unknown, to live faith as part of doubt. Without doubt, there is no faith. Without fear, there is no courage. That's that whole idea. But even more specifically, every loss, every great loss in life, whether it's the death of a loved one, whether it's the loss of a job, whether it's a move that you're making to another part of the country, another part of the world, whether it's moving out of addiction into recovery, every one of those is a loss of your own perceived identity, who you were. And as soon as you lose that, lose your health, have to go into surgery, find a tumor, whatever it is, that throws you into that liminal space. It's just like the whirlwind taking Dorothy to the land of Oz. Suddenly, all the rules have changed. The whole landscape is different. There's monsters and difficulties out there that you hadn't perceived in the familiar world before. You can be a contemplative by intention and do what we have been talking about in terms of finding ways to step away from the familiar life and move into liminal space, or you can be a contemplative by catastrophe and let life do it for you. But ultimately, life will continue to strip away, if you live long enough, all of the familiar and all of the parts of life that you have built up to make you feel secure and certain, even if it's only death. Why do we fear death? That is a stripping away of everything that we think it means to be us, to be who we are. So a combination of the two obviously would be the best. If we can intentionally start to work the practice of holding more lightly to the things that we think we're certain of and starting to step away from them and recognizing when life is tossing us huge opportunities to do the same thing, kind of writ large, do the same thing more intensely. Like right now, we have this COVID opportunity to see how life looks when it's stripped of all the things that we thought were so integral, so certain, so solid. And we realize all that can be stripped away by the stroke of a pen, almost literally. And then you have people who are going through this COVID collectively, and they're also having to deal with surgeries for tumors, and they're also having to deal with the death of loved ones, and they're also having to deal with the loss of their job, and they're also having to deal with their kids suddenly home and trying to figure out how to homeschool. All of these are layers upon layers of liminal space and uncertainty, and it becomes overwhelming. But if we at the same time can have that sort of split vision where we can see, yeah, these are the physical difficulties, but here also is the task within the task. what I am learning as I continue to just show up and navigate these things as best I can. And it doesn't have anything to do with how well you do the task necessarily. It has to do with you showing up and continuing to work the task and realizing that's what's happening inside as you continue to stay in this place of disorientation and this place of disturbance. You are learning something huge about being able to have that vantage point that sees multiple sides of the equation and brings them all into that unity, that non-dual thinking. That's what life is all about. And so if we can see that there is maybe that method in the madness again, if we can see that there is purpose, even in the painful circumstances we find ourselves in through that loss and stages of grief, then we can move through them. We can keep showing up and eventually overcome and get to that place of acceptance.
Yeah. So this is great because I think I have a better understanding of one of the things that Dave's taught me. And that is, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. So again, when I would look at the purpose of life, it was, what do I do to fulfill my purpose? Am I a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker, whatever it is? And that's free will. Okay. All in all, it's my preference in life. Whatever I prefer to do, who I choose to be my wife. These are preferences. And if all of a sudden I guess the wrong vocation, I guess the wrong mate and stuff, have I strayed from God's will? Well, maybe so, maybe no. But with Dave's perspective of it here is much more, it's not what I'm doing, it's how I'm doing it. How do I show up in my vocation? How do I show up in my relationship? How do I show up in my marriage every day? And this methodology, these techniques and stuff, again, a daily discipline of meditation, mindfulness. I've started walking meditation now, and that's been wonderful, wonderful. For my meditation, Dave was teaching me, again, focusing on breath work and the cool air coming in and the warm air going out. Well, doggone it, I've got hills around my house. There's some breathing going on, and there's some heart beating and stuff. And I feel my weight underneath my feet, on the balls of my feet when I'm going up hills, and on the back when I'm going down. And I hear the birds singing and such. Even though I'm walking through the neighborhood, I have a sense of presence of what it was like before the developer came in and created this neighborhood. And I have this connection with the land that I never would have had before taking a walk through the neighborhood. And I come centered, and there's something that, again, in that space when I'm not all in my head and I'm just present in that moment, that space in there, again, it's just because there was an opening, something comes in and replaces it that's not as noisy as my head. And it's not all these biases and these needs for certainty and to need to be right and these differentiators and all these kind of things and stuff. Yeah, they're still there, but they're not as loud kind of stuff. And yeah, I know I've still got a long way to go, but also I still have an awareness that I have changed. I am different than I'm before. The demons may still be with me, but we got a friendship. We've got a truce going on. Demons in my head. Right now, we have a truce. And that's wonderful.
Well, Randy, you're bringing
a lot and feels a lot. To have a truce with his demons is serenity.
And you're bringing up a huge point. I mean, if I left the impression that the goal is to be existing inside a completely silent mind, a completely silent head, that's not going to happen. And it shouldn't happen. Thoughts are always going on. The outside stimulus is always happening, and as you put it so eloquently, the demons are there, but we can be aware of them and not choose to focus on any one of them at the same time. As you're taking that walk, the way you described it was perfect. Feeling the weight on the balls of your feet and being aware of everything. But if you don't name it, as I heard someone say, it's perfect. This is a tree. This is a bird. This is what I know about birds. This is what type of tree. As long as that dialogue just quiets down and you just see the colors and the shapes and you're actually in the picture rather than looking at it in a frame, that makes all the difference in the world as to whether you're present or not, whether you're in a contemplative liminal space or not. So that's it. It's not about complete silence. but it's about the stillness within whatever you find interiorly or exteriorly going on. And that's a huge point, just so that you don't have all of us trying to do things that are probably not going to be possible in terms of contemplative spirituality.
Yeah. Well, and again, having a bias. What my thought of the spiritual person was again, somewhere along the way, I got an idea that the person could be at perfect peace and there was no thoughts, no disturbances. That was what serenity was. And again, what my experience is disturbances come, but they're not as loud, and the length of them, I don't hold on to that outside thing that's again, or even an inside thing. This acceptance, I'm no longer, my understanding of the word acceptance in this application is no longer resisting, no longer fighting. And it's amazing how much more energy I have in life when the energy isn't directed towards fighting. In those in the rooms of AA, you hear phrases, "We cease to fight anyone or anything, including alcohol." Okay, first the alcohol, that was the abstinence that I needed and got in this liminal space and this discomfort and stuff. But when I kind of externally, when I was be tempted to argue, do contrary action, keep your mouth shut, Randy. What's really your motive here? Or again, do you just want to win the argument to prove that you're right? Again, as opposed to having a little more space of well, maybe instead of arguing, maybe we can have a discussion and find out maybe we have more in common than disagreeing about. These things that are almost quite the opposite. In fact, most times they are quite the opposite of how I lived before, that caused so much frustration. By doing these practices of meditation, of mindfulness, again, the contemplative life, has allowed for me to have a connection within and around me that I've never had before. I was very much the lonely man in a crowded room all my life. And I guess in closing and stuff like that, the whole purpose of all this, again, we could talk about certain things that might be, a little more tangible for you. It helps me to understand that this effort has benefited me and to continue on with it. But really, from 10,000 feet above, what the Bible teaches and what these techniques provide is connection. Is that correct, Dave?
Yes. And let me say one more thing. If we're starting to wrap up, let me say one more thing, because for someone who is hearing this maybe for the first time, or hearing this discussion either about contemplative spirituality, liminal space, all this for the first time, the question that is probably forming in their mind right now, because I know it was in mine when I was approaching this for the first time, is what is the answer that you're going to get? Because we're looking for an answer. If our life is unmanageable and we're in pain, we're looking for an answer, a way that will make the hurting stop. If we're looking for a way forward, we want the answer that is going to give us a risk-free path. So we're always looking for an answer. And contemplative spirituality is not going to provide an answer in that sense, the way we're looking for it. And when we talk about, meditation and centering prayer, it's just well, then what happens? How is there some sort of answer at the end of all this? What I have found over the years is that contemplative spirituality doesn't give us the certain answer that we're looking for. It's really a better way, and an increasingly better way, of framing the question. As you move into more contemplative space, certain things that are not true and not the way forward present themselves, and you recognize them as such. It's kind of a narrowing of the field by eliminating what's not true, and also more and more incisive ways to frame the questions. Truly in life, there is no binary answer. It's not right and wrong. Once again, that's dualistic thinking. It's more and more diving into the center of the connection that you're talking about, Randy, in more and more complete ways. And so it's not that you're going to get this enlightenment or this answer in any one session of meditation or centering prayer or whatever you're doing, because that's not the purpose of it. But the purpose of it is to clear the decks and allow that way of going forward to become more and more pure, more and more productive, more and more full of the effects that you're looking for in life, and you will become more and more convinced of what's true as you move forward. But I wanted to make that comment because you could really work at odds with yourself if you try to move down a path like this. If you're looking for certainty again, if you're looking for specific answers, they won't come. And in fact, the further you go into this, you realize the less and less that you're going to get that kind of certainty, but you will get a conviction that will bring you to trust that makes the certainty unnecessary. It just obviates the need for that certainty in that way, because you trust more and more the process, and you trust the unity and the connection that is unseen and undergirds all of this. So for what that's worth, or what, if that makes any sense, I hope that kind of at least reframes what it is we're trying to do here.
Yes. And see, Dave, yeah, there's so many things that I've gleaned from him that I try to pass on, because it's changing my life, and I want others to have a chance to experience it. So again, I'm so glad Dave could join us and expand upon things that I'm trying to present here. And I think he communicates it in a more effective way, likely because he's just been doing this longer than myself. I don't mean to go back into my mode that I don't know anything. Again, I've tested, I've tried it. It works. But I'm still really in a novice mode. And Dave, by doing a lot longer and being in this contemplative space more, he communicates so much better. So I guess what I'm saying is, if this is new for you, and some of this is quite unusual and stuff, but it's still kind of drawing you in, know that everybody has their first day on the job. Okay. You can start somewhere. And if you'd like to connect with Dave, he's very generous with his time. Again, as I started off with here and stuff, I can't recall a single question that I've ever proposed to Dave that he wasn't inviting to and wanting to engage in and explore more what interests me. He always comes from a perspective of what's important to you when you engage with Dave. He's still present, but he allows me to be big. I can suck the air out of the room and he's okay. He still seems to have some air left to help me. So again, if you're wanting to explore contemplative meditation, prayer, any of those topics we've touched on, or frankly anything at all, it's kind of that's the thing about Dave. Frankly, if he doesn't know it, he'll point you in a different direction to somebody who may. But he's always been able to present himself from a way where I left our time together in a better place than when we started. I hope that you, as being part of our conversation, have had a similar experience. But then again, this is the mystery and stuff. You don't have to have. Again, it's still okay. I guess what I'm saying is, and stuff, there is a lot less right and wrong and a lot more okay in this world than I've ever seen it before. And it keeps on getting more and more okay every day. But it always happens when I talk about connection and unity and stuff. When I'm with people, it's no longer the codependent seeking that stamp of approval and that confirmational bias. Again, it's what I try to put into words as spirit speaking to spirit. And that's what I mean by the connection and stuff. I was really hearing Dave and stuff, and I'm pretty sure the way he was talking, he was really hearing. So yeah, that little thing about listening in a deeper, more meaningful way has been life-changing for me. And if you'd like to have more of that, again, Dave, how could people get a hold of you?
Oh, they can get a hold of me through our The Effect website if they want to, theeffect.org, THEEFFECT.org. They can get through to me through my own website, davebrisbin.com. They can message me here if that is available. If you want to make that link available, Randy, they can message me. And then eventually we can get on email and text and phone or Zoom or whatever ways that it makes sense for us to connect. But I am a teacher at heart, and there's nothing I like better than to be able to see light bulbs go on over other people's heads. So the favorite thing that I do during the day is just one-on-one communication of some sort or another. So yeah, if any of your members want to connect on these issues, I'd be happy to.
Great. Well, thank you. Yeah. So again, thank you, Dave, for your time. Thank you. They've been viewing for your time as well. Again, some of them have been commenting and stuff. They want to come back and listen to it. Yes, Facebook Lives exist for, I think, about 7 days. So if this is something you want to view again, please do so over the course of the next week. Yeah, this has been a great experience, a wonderful way to start today. Thank you so much, Dave. And again,
thank you, Randy,
for all joining us. Have a great day.
All right, bye-bye.